Good morning, Barcelona. Wow, great. Can we do it again? Good morning. All right. Why are we all here today? Well, I can tell why I'm here. I'm here because I want to see the latest things, and I want to see the latest asset intelligence solutions, and I want to hear about smart factories and clean aviation, and I want to experience wonderful new things that have changed since we were here a year ago. But I'm also here because I want to meet the heroes of the industries that are making it all happen. So, speaking of the heroes, and please allow me to make some of them uncomfortable. So I saw Richard, I saw Roger, Terry, Bonnie. Many of these heroes are hiding behind the stage, but they're the ones that are bringing this whole event together and are making it happen. So thank you. Who am I? I am Helena Lisachuk, and I lead IoT practice of Deloitte globally, and I'm also part of the program committee for this event for the past 5 years, basically since we established. And I'm here to introduce our keynote panel. And our keynote session this year will be a little bit different. It's not about Internet of Things. It's actually about Internet of Humans, because we explored the human perspective of all of these great technologies around us and what they mean. So without further ado, let me introduce the moderator, who is the chief strategist of Deloitte in IoT. He's also a futurist with very vivid imagination, as you will probably experience, Mr. IoT. He is also known as Robert Schmidt. Robert, floor is yours.
Thank you. Hola, Barcelona. I'm sorry, that's the only thing I can do. My Spanish is really bad, but I at least dressed in something Spanish just for you. So with that, I want to say thanks for having us. Who is it the first time to be here? Yeah, me too. Welcome. How is it? What, do you like it? Whoa, whoa, woo! Come on, come on, come on. Oh, here we go. Okay, you can do this. I love this. Thank you. So I'd like to bring up my panelists. I'm not going to let Helena go off the stage. Please join us, Helena.
Okay.
Mark, Michael, can you join me? Can you hear me, or am I just yelling to myself? Oh, okay, so I'm just yelling to myself. Good, okay. Please have a seat. I have awesome panelists today. I'm doing something different. Typically, I talk about something techie. Today, I get to talk about human stuff. And what we want to talk about today is, I want to talk about how do we feel about technology? How do people around us feel about technology? So we did a survey, and in order to talk about the survey, I brought with me a few panelists. We have Mark Cotelier, Executive Director of Deloitte Insight and Integrated Research. I'm going to call him the father of the survey, so for all the statistical questions, and when I don't understand it, I go to Mark. That's true in general too, by the way, not just for the research. We have, oh, you're sitting the opposite way. We have Helena here. You heard about Helena. When I need something European, she's my go-to, because I'm actually originally I'm Austrian, and so now I kind of feel home when I go with Helena. Thank you for being here. And then we have Michael Godoy, the Program Director of Telemedicine and Scalable Therapeutics. Michael, let's start with you. I'm going to sit down here. What does that mean? You work at the University of California in San Francisco. What does that mean?
So I work at the intersection of mental health and technology, developing telemedicine and scalable therapeutic projects with clinicians and engineers, really just mixing up my passions of technology and also my career-long interest in mental health.
Mark, can you go and just tell us, what does someone do when you're deep into statistics every day, all day?
Sure. Very briefly, I lead something called Deloitte Center for Integrated Research, where we take on topics that cut across the various industries and sectors we serve on behalf of our clients and our practice. So we work very closely with the practice on things like Industry 4.0, IoT, trying to bring a perspective and some understanding for what's at the cutting edge.
That's awesome, thank you. So, can we, I actually forgot to get the clicker. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so that's not the next slide, in case you're wondering. What we did is we did a survey, and it was all about asking people that know about technology how they feel about it. How has technology positively impacted their life? And we gave them a scale of 1 to 5. And on that scale, oh, it's over there. I'm gonna see. It's on the podium, you think? Next. What do you think next? Okay, I'm gonna talk about it instead of, and what we did is we asked them about positivity and technology, and we gave them a set of technologies. And what we did is we took the number 4 and 5 and ranked that from there. Oh, here we go. So the question was, what impact do you think technology will have on your personal career prospects? And as I said, it was a scale of 1 to 5, and you can see the technologies underneath it. Mark, question for you. How did you come up with this question?
So we spend a lot of time looking across this technology set in order to understand primarily how executives feel about these technologies. And so if you look at most of the work that is done in this space, thought leadership across all the firms that will be talking to you today, typically what they'll say is, we asked 600 executives what they thought about this technology or that. But when we walk out on this floor, we will all have an individual visceral reaction to the technologies that we're going to see. And we kept noting the fact that as we go into implementation environments, these are not the leaders of the organization that are being asked to accept this technology in their lives. These are the people that make the organization go. And we're seldom asking them what they think. And so we wanted to create a situation where we could go to normal people, to everyday individuals, and find out from them how they were perceiving the impact of these kinds of technologies on their individual career prospects. Because after all, they are the ones that are going to be asked to adopt, appropriate, and use these technologies. And so we ought to have some sense of how they're feeling about it, and what are the influencers of that feeling? Positive or negative, what are the influencers of how they feel about individual technologies? So that's what we set out to do, 9,500 people across 8 countries, and I think the results are pretty interesting.
I have to admit, when I heard about this research first, so let me start by saying I live my life in tech. I love using tech for business problems, and I was a little afraid of the results. And what I realized is this is the best audience I could have to take these results back and actually make an impact with you on those results. So let's see the results. What does it tell us? What does it tell me? Let me tell you what I took out of this. There were only 3 technologies, and thank you that IoT came in first, because this would have been the wrong conference to take it to otherwise. Okay? But even IoT only came in at 53%. And by the way, these little tick marks, I asked Mark about this. This is the variance of people, how much of an error is there. This is actually representative of people around us that are familiar with those technologies. There's actually only 3 technologies that are above 50. I have to say that was fascinating to me, and I really took out of this the question I want to ask the panel today as the topic, and I want you to take home is, how can we take these numbers and make them at least 10% better by next year? So, Michael, I want to come back to you. When you saw this, what did you think? Is this representative of what you see in your studies? What's your thought?
Oh yeah, this is definitely representative of my experience at UCSF. I actually have a pretty interesting story to illuminate this fact. So at UCSF, we're developing something called the Emotionally Intelligent Bot, which is a chat bot that understands users' emotions and could triage the user to an appropriate resource online. And so during our presentation to our entire center, there was 3 kind of very different reactions. And so our center director, who's been a psychiatrist for over 40 years, he was like, this is amazing. It's going to solve all the scalable therapeutics problems. Everyone's going to have access. Next up was our research director, who she's mid-career, and she was like, where's the evidence to back this up? What are the privacy concerns involved? And then finally, there was our admin. When she heard about this, her eyes blew up, and she's like, oh my God, Terminator is coming. So she was about to pull a Sarah Connor type thing with our projects, but yeah, that just kind of shows like the three varying responses that people have to new technologies. Some people will embrace it and see it as a way to solve our current day's problems. Other people would be skeptical. They will need the evidence to actually fully accept this technology. And other people are just like absolutely not.
Go ahead. So I want to ask the audience, this is a participating kind of thing. I'm sorry for the people who came, they thought they can just listen to us. You gotta have to raise your hand. Who is in the Terminator side? Very skeptical about chatbots. Let's take chatbots. Raise your hand. The Terminators in the room. Wow, there is none. Okay, good audience. Who is skeptical? Okay, some. You do know that all of you have to raise the hand now when you're fully supportive, right? Who is fully supportive? Oh, well, okay. Interesting. Thank you.
See,
Mark?
So remember, this is why I think the research is important, right? Because what we have in this room are folks that are very familiar with these technologies, like your executive director, who who see the future here. But what we know and what this data tells us, and this data, by the way, controls for education, it controls for gender, it controls for age, and a variety of other factors. What we know is that some people are very positive. So this doesn't mean that everybody's negative or everybody's positive. It means that there's a big range out there, and we need to learn to help those folks. If we're going to achieve our goals for the organization with technology deployment, we need to learn how to deal with that and to recognize that depending on the environment that we're going into, depending on the technology set we're working with, we're going to face very different kinds of reactions.
Helena, when you saw this chart and when you hear Michael talk about the three different reactions, what reactions do you see with our clients?
Well, actually, it's I see all kinds of reactions. And yes, I've seen the Terminator coming multiple times, trust me. And I think what's happening is that there is a relationship between something new and technologically innovative with the value it gives to you as an end user, a person. So the shorter the linkage is with understanding what this chatbot does for me, what this AI solution does for me, how do I benefit, how my life becomes easier, and that, let's say, the chatbot takes some of the administrative things away from me, and I love it, fully embrace it. However, if it makes me work harder, or all of a sudden it starts making decisions for me, we may have a problem, right? So I think what I see with clients and what tends to work is that finding the right narrative and the right story, how this specific piece and how this specific change provides value to you directly, and the shorter that linkage is, that's where I see successes with clients. But it takes a while to actually untangle how to build that linkage. Yeah.
So I'm going to take us on a journey here we didn't plan for, but that's what happens when you're on a panel with me. You talked about chatbots. A story I read about them, which fascinated me, was chatbots that were given training how to sell. And what ended up happening is it took a while, they got better, they sold, and eventually they started literally lying to people to sell. So put this in perspective, right? They learned to lie. What about ethics with machine learning? I was at a conference, Singularity Conference in San Francisco, and Ray Kurzweil, one of the luminaries in this space, said that only the last year and a half did we have the compute power to really do machine learning. But what about ethics in this field? And I'm gonna just throw it out to you, and whoever wants to pick up the ball, I'll leave it with you instead of calling on you. Go for it.
So ethics is a very tricky situation, especially with the chatbot example I gave. We're kind of in this flux that we're not sure how much our chatbot should be able to do. Yeah, our chatbot can identify if someone's in crisis, if they're experiencing suicidal ideation. But at what point do we make that call that they're in crisis, that they need to see a therapist, or they need to go call the suicide hotline? It's a very tricky situation and how to not only handle their data, but also how to handle what we do with their data. I think that's most important. And I think that in an ethics first principle approach to this, we always have to be thinking, how is this going to affect the users? How is this going to affect their data? And there's a lot of tricky ethical questions, especially with something like the emotionally intelligent bot we're developing, where literally in some situations it's life or death. So ethics is really a critical component of that, and you have to really build that from the ground up.
Yeah, I'll try to connect this back to the data that we're looking at on the screen and the question of how is it that we drive positivity. As part of the data that we collected, part of the controls that go into this study, we asked individuals two other questions. One was about something called self-efficacy, which is how do you feel about your own ability to learn and use new technologies? And the other one was about excitement. That is, are you as an individual someone who tends to be excited about these technologies? That excitement issue links to the ethical issue, for me at least, particularly with younger generations who are very interested, and we see this in the news a lot. It's part of what drives the survey, part of whom are very interested in what is the impact of these technologies on society. What we know is that engagement, self-efficacy and excitement are the biggest drivers of positivity. So a 1-point increase in that level of engagement will make a person 121% more likely to rate a technology positively. So that's huge. So we need to think about what are the drivers of engagement in technology per se in order to begin to work with our organizations to help drive a positive perception of the technology that we're trying to implement so that we can achieve the organizational goal that we have. That seems very clear from the research that we've done.
Yeah, when you showed me the research, one of the things that happened is I sat down and I thought, what are my fantasies, my ideas, my hypotheses of why the data is what it is and what can we do about it? And one of the numbers was around age groups. And I realized I didn't fit into one of the age groups very well. So I had a call with colleagues of us, and we sat down, and it was really interesting to see how different age groups looked particularly different at privacy. There was this, we talked with someone, I think you broke it at 18 to 26 or something like this, and then there was 26 to 45, and I didn't fit into either one of those two. And so I brought people in, and I had someone in the age group, in the middle one, and they said, oh my God, I don't want all my data out there. What happens when I apply for a loan and people know about all of this? And then I had someone that was below 26, and he said, I don't care. I want the learning that I get from the machine that really helps me. I actually am okay with the data being available. So there was a clear difference, and we've seen this in a variety of different studies. Elena, any thoughts, any comments on those really, really tricky subjects of ethnic and privacy?
Look, I lived in the US for 20 years, and then I moved to Europe, right? So there was a slight difference of how traditional Americans see privacy topics, and sometimes it's just a little bit easier, more relaxed. And in Europe, it's a little bit different, right? But I think, again, it's about what do I gain while I give it up? And again, it's when you interact with people, when you interact with humans, you have to see them as humans. It's about giving them assurance data is protected, giving them assurance that there are guides and guide rails on how the data is used, right? That it's not going to be used against you. At the same time, it's also providing, the reason why do I need to give you this data? And that's like one of those GDPR laws, right? Okay, so if you need to tell me why you need my data and how you will use it. It's very simple, right? It's common sense. And I think once kind of like some of this is understood, and I think, Mark, it's part of your research was there is a correlation between how the technologies are understood and the level of education and awareness and acceptance, right? And I think understanding the rules of the road and privacy and how the data is used is just one of those elements where correlation would apply.
Yeah, I mean, we see this in two places, in this and in other research. Excuse me. One is education in general matters. So the more educated you are, perhaps not surprisingly, the more positive you are about the use of these technologies. But then other research that we find where we specifically do look at leaders is that the more, and I think we talked about this last year
Yeah.
actually on this stage, the more engaged a leader is in the specific use of the technology, we talk about it as getting your hands dirty instead of waving them in the air, the more engaged they are, the more they believe in their own people's ability to adopt, to use, to succeed with the technology, as opposed to having to change out people. So this, what you're talking about, I think is really an important element of the whole technology game.
By the way, when I walked around, I saw a lot of people on the phone. I know you're all tweeting. This is all you do, nothing else. In case you do tweet, make sure you do hashtag IoT SWC19. That's the hashtag for here. Thank you. And Mark will release actually a full report on this. I want to go and sort of come back to one topic. By the way, who is from Spain here? Raise your hand. Okay.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, you made the top of the line almost between, right behind, actually ahead of China on this chart, so pretty awesome. I found this chart super interesting, and it's a bit of an eyesore because there's so many lines on there, but what I thought was interesting is how there's a huge difference in positivity by country. I mean, you can see it goes from 30 all the way to the low 30s, all the way to high 60s, and with China and Spain leading the pack. I didn't even try to make fantasies out of this, why that's the case. I have my own personal theories. Helena, let's come back to you. You talked about differences Europe and the US. Any thoughts on this chart?
Yeah, that was so when I saw the research, that was my immediate reaction. I would say this is data point number one, was how different the country's reaction was. And we took a topic of AI. I think there was a huge difference with how Chinese audience responded towards the topic of AI versus the US, right? But then
absolutely.
the word machine learning
Absolutely.
had completely different thinking. And it was absolutely fascinating. And then I started working with some of the clients in China. I actually had literally a week after a meeting with gentlemen that are from building the AI city in China. And maybe they're in the audience, maybe we'll catch up afterwards at dinner. But how important AI is and how the word is embraced in the culture. While maybe in the US, for example, or in Western economies, it brings a little bit of a threat almost. While learning has a positive connotation, so while maybe technically speaking, of course, AI is different from machine learning, but it's not a huge difference. But in terms of how it's interpreted and perceived, miles apart. So I don't know if you'd like to say something about it. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. Yeah.
I'd really like to talk about the concept of technophobia and which psychological phenomenon contribute to this fear of advancing technologies. And so we heard a lot about how self-efficacy could help embrace these new technologies, but there's an interesting concept in psychology called the locus of control, which, on the far end, you have people who have an internal locus of control, which is I control my destiny. And then on the opposite spectrum, you have an external locus of control, which is others control my destiny. And what you could see is people that have an external locus of control, meaning other things control where I end up, have a high fear of advancing technologies because these technologies that are developing have so many different applications, so many different features that really humans don't know the unknown, so their mind kind of fills in all these crazy scenarios. And so it's really this concept of having something else control your life, having technology control your life, and not the other way around.
Mark, any thoughts on locus of control, country differences?
Yeah. The difference in the countries is fascinating to me, and one speculates to look at this, and very often we'll group these lines into sort of a China-Spain cohort. India seems to be sitting there in the middle, and then you've got a cluster of Western European and the US all together showing lower levels of positivity. Now, if we want to, the question is, why is that so? And frankly, this is something that we think needs lots of additional research. We need to dive even deeper into the data to understand that there could be cultural implications there that may have to do with one's feelings of control. It could be...
Is it an investment by localities, governments?
It could be. It could be a level of development. This is something that we cannot claim that we have the answer to. What I think is really important about this, and I had this, we presented this data to a group of supply chain leaders and noted that there's about a 20 or 25% swing in positivity as you cross countries. And what the guy said was, look, if we were looking at a product and we saw a 20-point swing in the attitude towards a product, we would think that's a big deal. And so, for example, last week I was in the U.S. talking to some organizations that are interested in technology promotion in the U.S., and they said, look, we have our work to do. This isn't bad news or good news. It's just news. It's just data that we need to think about. How is it if we in our respective countries are interested in driving technology growth as a means to drive economic growth, we need to think about what are the people on the ground that are being asked to use these technologies going to believe, going to think, that's going to influence how they approach the technology. So as individuals, we need to think about it, and as economies, I think we need to think about it.
So we have a few more minutes left, and I want to come back to the question I asked in the beginning, which is, what can we do? And when I say we, I mean all of us. I feel, I look at you as leaders in this space as well, and so therefore, what can all of us do to make these numbers go up? And I had a fantasy in my little blog I wrote on LinkedIn this weekend, which says, I think it's about engaging experiences. And why did I think this? Because people lined up for iPhones when they came out for hours. And I wish people would line up for our IoT devices the same way. And they didn't even know what it was, so there was no fear of it. I believe it was about the experience. So we created what I lovingly call the Rubber Duck Factory, which is an augmented reality 30 by 30 smart factory, because I think it's so hard to envision what a smart factory looks like. Let's make it live, real 3D, full size. And so if you want to see it, we have it out there. That's my version of creating an engaging experience. But I'm curious what you think. Let's just go the other way, Michael.
I think that humans in general need to be aware of their cognitive biases. If we just take autonomous driving, a lot of autonomous driving crashes are on the news, and humans have a tendency to remember the negative, and that's called the negativity bias. So I think that there's a lot of these types of biases that makes us fear new and advancing technologies, and I believe that if we're educated about our own experiences of how we feel about technology, it'll go a long way.
Well, I think, again, I will keep going back to human need to be human, and human need to have that human contact and understanding what's in it for me when I'm using any of these technologies. Whether you're a factory worker, or you're a nurse, or you're a doctor, or you're doing a brain surgery, or you're doing 5G installation, at the end of the day, with all of these technologies, you touch them, you need to benefit from it somehow, directly, indirectly. And I think the other important thing, we talked a little bit about the role of leadership. I think role models with leaders that are really hands-on, that are there with their teams, was kind of taking this concept forward. That is quite effective, and I love to see more leaders. To me, it's a great inspiration. I was always lucky. I was always surrounded by leaders like that, and I just hope all of us could do the same for our teams.
Yeah, I think that the behavioral concepts that you two are talking about are fundamental. We've done a ton of research in this space around behavioral economics and management at Deloitte. We see the impact that has on our implementation teams. It's fundamental. As the data guy, I'll go back to the results and say, we looked at the concepts of engagement, self-efficacy, excitement. Those are massive drivers, and it is clear that we can influence how people, through some of the things that you're talking about, showing them, helping them understand, painting a vision of the future, we can influence the level of excitement that they have. But there's another driver that we haven't talked about in the data. One more question that we asked was, agree or disagree, The statement is, when my employer makes decisions, they have my interests in mind, right? A simple statement, agree or disagree. A 1-point increase in that metric, scale 1 to 5, drives a 30% increase in the probability that someone rates any given technology positively. And what that suggests to me is that we have a huge opportunity as leaders to demonstrate that we have our employees' interests in mind, and by doing that, we can drive positivity and therefore the probability of successful deployment through our implementations.
With that, I want to thank the panel, and I hope you saw that we had your interest in mind in bringing multiple people up there rather than just having one of us. And I want to say thanks for being here, and let's get emotionally connected to our technology and our people. Thank you so much.